Hey guys, welcome back. So before I get into the main topic of this video, I just want to give some brief context. And if you've watched my past two videos, this video connects to them. And so when I made the video talking about my kind of audio process that I go through when making my videos, this connects to that because I did say I'll make a video talking about the process that I go through with making my thumbnails and video editing and whatnot. So this connects to that video, and it also connects to the one I previously made talking about how Linux isn't perfect. And I kind of tried to explore the mentality, I suppose, of Windows and Mac users who perhaps they've taken a look at Linux, maybe they want to give it a try, but maybe something's stopping them. Now, unless you absolutely need to use Photoshop, unless your job depends on it or whatever, if you just simply can't use a different tool other than Photoshop, then, well, that kind of sucks. But for normal users, for the majority of the people, in my opinion, even if you're a freelance artist or whatever the case may be, I think that using GIMP is completely usable. And even though it's not a replacement to Photoshop, you know, you can't just expect to use GIMP and expect it to have the same exact features and workflow and everything with Photoshop. You can't just expect that. It is a really good, if not the best alternative. And before I talk about GIMP, I also want to mention Krita as well, which is another option. And I don't use this one as much because this one is more so for kind of like digital drawing and whatnot. So this is very good as well. You can look up people using this program on YouTube and you can see that they can do some really neat stuff with this program. But I'll mainly be focusing on GIMP because I'll kind of give you guys a tour on kind of how I use this program for my workflow. And if you're a Windows user or a Mac user, do take a look and kind of see whether you might like this program or not. And also another thing that I'm going to mention before I talk about this is there's a YouTube channel called Logos by Nick, and his channel, one of his videos, helped me design this logo. Now this logo is kind of blurry because this isn't the original template for my thumbnails. I lost the original file, so I'm just kind of using a more blurred version, but he did help me create this design, and this is using the golden ratio. So I'm going to leave a link to his channel in the description, and you can see just how powerful this tool can be. GIMP and also Inkscape. But of course, all these three programs that I mentioned, they each specialize in different regards. So yeah. Now, when you take a look at GIMP, especially if you're coming from Photoshop or whatever, one thing you could do is you could go to Edit and then Preferences. And now it's kind of glitched up because after all, this is a GTK styled application and I'm on KDE, so I don't know why this happens. But anyway, if you go to Interface and then Theme, you have various kind of like color options here. And I think that this is definitely the first step when using a program, trying to make it so that it fits your personal work style, workflow. I think that that's a really good step to take initially when trying to, use any program. And if you go with the system theme, then that depends on what your GTK theme is. So that's pretty nice, especially if you're using a GTK desktop environment like GNOME, where most of the applications are GTK based. Then applying a theme will affect not only all your other applications, but this one's going to fit with all your other applications as well. So that's neat. So you can do that. And then for the icon theme, as you can see, there's there's colored icons, there's kind of dark and light. So this is more so for a light theme. These icons are for a dark theme, and you can also adjust the size from here. And another thing I like doing is unchecking this because it just kind of takes up space. So a quick overview here on the top left, you have all your tools. And as you can see, you have a bunch of tools here that you could use. Here you have both of your colors. Here at the bottom, you have your tool options. So depending on whatever tool you use, you have your options here. And as you can see, there's plenty of options that you can choose from. And what I do here is I clicked on this little icon here, and then add tab, and then navigation. And so this is the navigation here, and it's pretty neat because you can basically control everything from here, how you want to kind of zoom in or fit your entire photo, or you could just hold control and with the mouse wheel you can scroll in and out, or you could kind of scroll left and right. So that's pretty useful. Now, the way I do my thumbnails is I first have this kind of template. So I initially have this layer here, which is for this what do you call this? I guess this is like an overlay, so that I could put my logo here and put this kind of silver, like grayish gradient kind of background. And then I have another layer for the actual background. So in order to have like a template, you could just go to File, and then you could just save as, and then it's going to save it as a template, and you can open it, and every time you'll have this template available, so that you don't have to keep going back and forth and whatnot to mess around with that. So if I wanted, for example, let's say I wanted to put like some random background here, right? I could just drop it. And so here you have a bunch of tools. Now this tool, I don't even know what this tool is called. Oh, it's the scale tool. So what you could do is you can select the tool, you can click on it, and then you can resize however much you want. Now, as you can see, it's keeping its proportions by default. If you hold Control, it scales it like this differently. So depending on whether you hold Control or not, it scales everything differently. And when I hold Shift, I can scale it however much I, to whatever proportions I'd like. But what I usually do is I kind of scale my photo and kind of center it here. I don't try to make it perfect. I just try to align it as best as I can. And so that takes up this layer here that I was able to add through this, and you can easily make new layers. You just right click and then click on new layer. And then for the effects, there's plenty of effects here. You could just go to filters, and then you have plenty of filters here, or you can go to image, or not image, where was it? Colors, there we go, colors, and you have plenty. I mean, take a look at all of these settings. I mean, there's so many things that you could do. And sure, it's going to take some time to learn, especially if you're used to Photoshop, but once you do learn it, it's a lot easier, obviously, and it's certainly worth it. So one thing I like to do with my backgrounds is I like to kind of add the contrast a bit, bump it up. Oh, that's the incorrect layer, my bad. Let's go back to colors. So I like to bump up the contrast a little, kind of have the colors pop out. And I also like to decrease the brightness. This is because I generally use white text, and I don't really want the background colors to make it harder to read. So that's what I generally do with this. And then when I go to the next layer, I select the little A icon here, and you can make any selection you'd like. And now I could just type in like test thumbnail, I don't know. And then here you could select the text, you can click on the color, you can make the text whatever color you want. Again, excuse the text here, it's kind of hard to read. It's not supposed to be like this, but you can make the size to whatever you want. I usually make it 122 by default. You can make things bold or italic or underlined. So you have your basic settings here, and also the very same settings you see here, you can take a look at them right here as well. And so one thing that's really neat is if you want to kind of add like an outline to the text, is you can go to the layer here, and you can add alpha to selection. So now it's selected the text, and you can go to select and then grow, and you can choose the amount of pixels you want. I usually leave it at 3. And sorry, my scroll wheel is kind of broken. And so now when you click on the fill bucket, it just fills everything for you, apart from these little, like when you have an E or an A, when there's these little loops here. And so that's how you can kind of add like an outline to your text. And so once, so this is at the very top left, this is like a selection tool. And once you select out of that, you can go back to this tool. This is probably, the scale tool is probably my favorite, because when you click on something, you can just move it around, or if you want to kind of scale it, make it a bit bigger. And as you can see, the scaling works very nicely, very well. There is also actually a tool that lets you, let's see here, let's see where it is, tools. Oh yeah, there it is. There's an align tool, which kind of lets you select it to the center or wherever you want it, but I still kind of haven't really figured out how to use that. But yeah, so this is just like a very basic thumbnail, and this is the kind of style of thumbnails that I've decided to go with. Just add a background here, have this always be present in every thumbnail so that people know that it's from my channel. And then I add the text, and I really like this. I just go with the default text font, sans serif bold. Well, it's not the default, I just leave it at bold so that I don't have to click the bold option every time. And then yeah, it's usually always white, the text is always white, and I always add the kind of outline so that it can pop up a little bit more. And another thing that people could do is, if you go to the layer where you can also show and hide layers here, but if you go to the layer that you want to work with, especially when there's text, what I like doing is I kind of like to highlight like a certain area just where the text is over it, and I go to colors, brightness and contrast, and I like to kind of decrease the brightness a little bit. Let me try to decrease it as much as possible because the background is already dark, so you can see it better. But as you can see, this certain area specifically is darkened on purpose so that you could see the text as much as possible. This especially works well with backgrounds that are pretty light, and I think it looks pretty neat. That's what I actually did for my previous thumbnail because the text wasn't as easy to read. Another thing that you could do, another really useful tool that's a must-have, is the magic wand or whatever it's called. Is that what it's called? Oh, well, in this case is the fuzzy select tool. But what you can do is, initially I didn't know how to work with this, but if you go to layer and then transparency and then add alpha channel, if that's not already selected, you can do that, and then you can have the kind of transparency tool here do its magic. But again, going back to the tool box here, you can adjust how much strength you want it to have, and of course you have also other more specific tools. But again, like I said in the beginning, unless you really absolutely need to use Photoshop for whatever reason, I think that GIMP is a great alternative. It's not a replacement, because you can't just expect it to act the same and do everything the same way. You kind of have to get used to new workflow and whatnot, but once you do get used to it, it's certainly worth it, because especially if you're not doing super professional stuff, like which even then you can do lots of professional stuff. Like I said, Logos by Nick, great channel. He does some really good stuff with this program. But I mean, if it's for like light photo editing or creating thumbnails or even more complex stuff, I mean, this is completely doable. And if you want to save the file, instead of just clicking save, you go to export, and then you can select where you want to save it, and then you can rename it to whatever you want, and then you can click export. And it has you can compress the file. This is especially good for thumbnails because YouTube doesn't like big files, but you can choose the compression level. You have plenty of options here that you can select from, and then all you have to do is just click export, and then once you're done with that, there you go, you have your thumbnail. And I think that, like I said, this is a great, excellent tool, and it's free and open source, and I'm personally really satisfied with it for sure. So yeah, that was basically how I make my thumbnails, and that's basically, in my opinion, the best alternative to Photoshop on Linux. I think it's more than capable. And yeah, so if you're a Windows user or Mac OS user, whatever, if you're really used to Photoshop and you like Linux, but you're kind of upset that it doesn't have Photoshop, take a look at GIMP. It's certainly worth your time. It's certainly worth looking into and trying to learn. So yeah, that was basically it. Hope you learned something new. Hopefully this video helped you, and yeah, thanks for watching.